Welcome to Using SQL Prompt in Visual Studio. I'm Kendra Little from Redgate Software. We are going to look at SQL Prompt, and it is going to help us refactor a couple different kinds of objects. We're going to work on one programmable object and one object from our offline schema. So, quick overview, what does that mean? In my database, since I have an existing database and I imported the schema of that, when that happened, programmable objects were created. Programmable objects aren't every object in SQL Server. Programmable objects are DDL triggers if you've got them, not everyone does, user-defined functions if you have them, stored procedures if you have them, as well as views if you have them. These are all ways to programmatically manage code in your SQL Server, hence the name programmable objects. This feature is enabled by default. You can disable it, but I think it's super handy for seeing, hey, what is the state of my database? And these, when you're editing a programmable object, you'll notice that what we're going to do is we are going to, right there in Solution Explorer for an existing one, we are just going to open it up and make some edits to it. We also have schema model. Now, schema model is not the same objects in programmable objects. It's different objects. It's things like tables. Not just tables, but also schemas. Our tables are all organized by their schema. You can see in this screenshot, DBO has its own little folder. We've got users, we've got types in there as well. Now, when it comes to editing these, this is an offline schema model, so we will not open these up and edit them directly there, but we can still edit these in Visual Studio, and I'll show you exactly how that works and how the schema model gets updated. SQL Prompt will help us make these edits more quickly and more easily, and you can find SQL Prompt in your menu at the top of your environment. Let's go ahead and dig in. The first kind of object that I'm going to edit is a programmable object. Let's work on one of those first. In Northwind, under the stored procedures, I'm going to open up customer order details.sql, and let's take a look at what this looks like. The first thing that you may notice are that there are a fair amount of green squiggles here. When you see these green squiggles, it means that we have some code analysis kicking in. SQL Prompt contains a code analysis feature that I have enabled. And what it's looking at is it noticed at this point in here, it noticed, hey, you've got an old style join in this query. Generally, folks don't use the comma joins anymore with SQL Server. It also is letting us know for things like product name and quantity. Got a little tooltip war going on here, but what it's saying there is unqualified column name. I haven't specified product name from which table. Let's go ahead and start cleaning this up. Get myself a little more real estate there. One of my favorite features, I mean, this is a kind of a small feature, but I really, really love this one, is let's say I want to change the alias for the products table. Right now it's capital P, and I like to use lowercase letters as my aliases. Well, I'm also referring to it here on product ID, and as we've mentioned, we have some unqualified names here. We're going to clean that up. If I want to change all occurrences of this, I can either use a shortcut or use the menu here and say, I want to rename, in this case, it's an alias. This also will work for variables, but I want to rename every occurrence of this alias in this query. So I am going to say, rename alias variable, and it highlights all of them. Now, as I type PR, it has replaced that capital P with PR in all of the occurrences in the query. In this case, there were only 2, but of course, there could be an awful lot. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for order details as well. And let's go ahead, and we could use the mouse for this, but I'll just use the menu. So I'm going to just do that one as lowercase od. And this time, there were a lot more of them that it could do. Now, one thing about SQL Prompt is there are so many options in it that not everything shows up in this right-click menu, because the most popular things will show up in here, like we'll look at Format SQL, but not everything is in here. One really cool thing that we can get to from the menu is qualify object names, which is Control B and then Control Q. And let's go ahead and click Qualify Object Names there. And what this did is, hey, check it out. It figured out product name is in the PR table. So it went ahead and qualified those things for me. Really, really handy and a time saver there. At this point, I feel like formatting my SQL. I have default options enabled. And notice that this query does not terminate with a semicolon. It was probably written before that was a common thing. Now, I think a lot of us who use SQL prompt at all do learn one shortcut really, really quickly, and we learn it well. It is the format SQL shortcut of Control-K, Control-Y. I think of that as a mnemonic. The way I remember that is keep your sanity. But you can come up with your own mnemonic. So I'll do Control-K and then Control-Y. It uses the style choice that I have enabled there, right? I have active styles up here. I'm using the indented style now. You can do custom styles and share those with your team if you want. So now I do still have some gotchas here. There's a little complaint that the money, small money data type is used. And if you read up in our docs, you'll see that lacks the precision that one might want when actually using money, and it's going to warn us about that. I've still got that warning about the old style join. So let's go ahead and fix that old style join. So I'm going to say join that table as OD, and then I'm going to say join. That's my join criteria there. And I have a choice here. This is an inner join, but I'm going to go ahead. I could leave this in the join criteria, this final criterion there, but I'm going to put it in a where clause. I'm going to go ahead, type where, get rid of my and. And this is kind of messy now, right? I've got sort of things messed up. So keep your sanity, Control-K, Control-Y. This is nicely formatted now. Now there's one more thing that I haven't done. The procedure body is not enclosed with begin end, which can help with readability. So let's go ahead and say begin here, and let's click end, or not click. I suppose I do still at this point have to type end there. And now I've got my procedure body enclosed. I'm still using the money data type. That one's a bit of a bigger change to make, but I'm pretty happy with my script right now. So I'm going to go ahead and save this script. I'm going to click the save button here. Now notice that it immediately says you've saved a change to the programmable object, but you haven't updated your dev database. So I can go ahead and deploy project to say, yeah, I want you to go ahead and update Northwind dev with this. To make my change reflected into my development database, this will actually execute it and help me know, hey, your script actually works. One of the nice things about SQL prompt is that keep your sanity, that Control-K, Control-Y format I did, it does make sure that things parse, but still it is nice to know, in fact, that it will deploy as well. So if I come back to my SQL Change Automation window, I can go back to the Output tab and see, yes, in fact, my deployment committed successfully. And if I want to scroll back up in this window, I can even see information about the programmable objects that were updated in there, right? So I can see all the details if I want them there. All right, so I have now deployed my change. If I go back here into Solutions Explorer, I can see that customer orders detail, I have modified it. So I want to go ahead and commit that change. I'm going to click on my change down there and say I have, refactored customer orders detail.sql here. And let's go ahead and commit that. Again, I'm just keeping things on my local repo. Now let's go ahead and do a bonus change here. I'm going to open up VS Code. And in VS Code, I have some PowerShell scripts that I have set up. Let's go ahead and open those up. What I've got here in VS Code is a simple PowerShell script that calls SQL Automation commandlets. And what I like doing is I like using these to demo and test the different ways that we can automate builds of our project and deploy them. You can do these same actions with plugins that we have for tools like Octopus Deploy and TFS. You can also directly access the commandlets. And I think when learning, it's really fun to work directly with the commandlets. Of course, do the version that you like. I've set up some variables here to tell this where my project is. Now I'm building directly out of my project. I Normally, if I was doing continuous integration, I would build probably out of the repo that I'm pushing to. But if you ever want to do a local build using the cmdlets, you can do that as well. I then am also giving it a package version. So I'm starting at .001. I've got some variables that I've populated, and I'm saying I want to export my artifacts to a local path, giving it information about where I want to perform the full build of my database. This will verify that the code I have to create the baseline, since I did create one of those, and then all of the migration scripts on top of that, along with any pre and post deployment scripts that I've added, this verifies that they all work and that I can build my database from source control from scratch, which is a fantastic thing to be able to prove. I'm also generating what's called a release artifact. A release artifact looks at a target database and says, what would I need to do to bring you up to speed? And I'm working on my beep beep dev instance here, but I'm starting with an empty target database. I'm going to have it just create a database named Northwind QA and deploy all the changes to it right away. Below all of these variables is the actual PowerShell script itself that does all of the work down there. So let's go ahead and click go and let it get started. The first thing it does is validate the project and say, is this something that looks like I can build? And then it goes on and we will be performing the build. Let's look as we're working through down there. Well, let's work through the steps. We first validate our project by invoking the database build. Then we create that release artifact. I'm telling it, or the build artifact first, rather. I am exporting it and then generating the release artifact. And look at this. We are already done. Now it's saying these migrations have been deployed successfully because I told it to go create and populate that Northwind QA database. So let's go back over here to Object Explorer and let's go to our databases and refresh. And hey, sure enough, we've got Northwind QA who showed up now, who got populated during this. Now you might be like, hey, what's that shadow database? That shadow database is being used to validate the work that I do in Northwind Dev behind the scenes as well. So it's totally normal that that showed up. So let's go into the stored procedures and view the stored procedure that we changed, which is customer orders detail. I can right click there and say view the code of that. And looking at that, that is the code that I have refactored. There's a begin end. There's no old style join. There's qualifiers for the names on there. So my change was deployed after the baseline script was applied to that Northwind QA database. Well, all right, so that was an example of changing a programmable object, which we edit directly in the Solution Explorer. What if we instead want to edit something in the schema model? Down here, let's go ahead and look at, for example, the customers table. If I pop open the customers table, notice that there's a little warning at the top of the screen. It says this contains a read-only view of your schema. If you edit this, it will be overwritten. This schema, not the programmable objects, but rather in this case, it's only tables, right? Because I don't have the other types of objects in my database. I have programmable objects and then I have tables. For these tables, these are maintained by the import process. Now I can still change them in Visual Studio. I'm going to go over to my Object Explorer here. And when it comes to choosing the database, I don't want to make my change in Northwind QA. I want to make my change in my developer database, which is Northwind Dev. And I can verify what I have set at my development database anytime by coming into SQL Change Automation and looking down and saying, hey, exactly who is my database and where are you? And you can change that if you want. For example, if you're using a branching strategy and you want to have a database that represents one branch versus another branch, you could use different databases for that if you wanted to. Or you could let SQL Change Automation update them. But in this case, Northwind Dev is my development database. That's where I want to base my edits. So I'm going to go into tables here. And I'm going to open up the customers table and take a look at it. Let's say I want to change an index on here. The current indexes don't have great names. They're named things like city and company name and postal code. So let's say I want to change something. Well, I'm going to right click on customers and I'm going to say, let's just view code here. I'll work on the code. And the tools inside Visual Studio now bring this up for me. It's the table and all the indexes. So let's say I want to change the postal code index. And I want to not only it currently has a key column of postal code, I also want to include maybe customer name or company name there. So I want to modify this index, and I also want to improve the name. So I'm going to go ahead and say we want it to be IX_customers. Maybe this is our naming convention. There's the key column, but now I also have includes. Okay, so this is what I want my index to look like. I'm going to go ahead and click on this update button, and I'm going to go ahead and say generate script. And it'll pop that into a new window for me. Now notice that my new window, which is up here on the right, it has a funny name. Well, this name represents a file over here. It has created a migration script for me in my Solution Explorer, which I can now see in the 1.1.0 changes menu there. I can also take a look at this script and see what it's doing. Well, I'm not sure I love this because what it's doing is it's dropping the existing index and then it is creating a non-clustered index. The SQL Server Data tools that generated this, it doesn't really know, hey, when you actually deploy this, are you deploying this to a place where you can reliably know that it's either Development Edition or Enterprise Edition so that you can use with online equals on? But I mean, maybe I don't even want to because I am deploying during a maintenance window, right? So it's up to me to know things like, do I want to drop the index and then create it offline, thereby locking up the whole table? Or do I want to change this? And I want to change this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm just working on this now. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. And I would rather do this. Let's go ahead and Control K, Control C to comment that out there. And I'm going to go ahead and when I create this non-clustered index, let's see. One of the first things I want to do is say with online equals on. And SQL prompt is helping me see what the options are. I also, let's see, maybe I want to do with drop existing equals on. It makes it easy for me in the column picker to see, hey, this is something I can do. I also want to do with drop existing equals on. Now I'm changing this around. I did keep this around because I want to create an index with drop existing equals on, I need to use the original name. So I'm going to do a rename after I modify the index. So in the create here, I actually want to put in the old name there. And then I'm going to grab that new name that I typed and let's do a rename there. So we are going to now create the index with drop existing equals on. So what we're going to do here is we are going to essentially add an included column to the postal code index. And after I do that, I do want to give it that better name. So let's do that first. Now I can get rid of my drop. And then I want to add in a command down here that does the rename. Now I have a hard time remembering the rename index command. So what I have done is I have created a snippet in SQL prompt. And I just started typing RN because the snippet I created, it's a custom snippet. It's named RNMI and it says rename an index. And I can preview here what that snippet looks like. So if I just keep typing RNM, I start getting the preview. And I'm going to go ahead and click enter to auto-complete that. And it pops my snippet in there. And let's go ahead and we'll put a go here above this in our migration. And I'll do Control K, Control Y. Keep your sanity to reformat my snippet because I didn't format my snippet pretty well. And it reminds me, I used some placeholders in here. I probably shouldn't have done the dollar signs there on my placeholders. I put some placeholders in here to remind me that when I'm doing a rename, I want to do the schema and then the object name and then the index name, right, that I want to rename. And then I type the new name there, but it's just the new index name. So what was this? This is IX, customers, postal code, and then includes there. And for the object type, I should specify that too. If I do want to create this snippet just for index renames, I could just populate that with object type equals index there and make it real easy for myself too. This is all under the snippets, which you control via the snippet manager here. There's a bunch of existing ones. You can add custom ones. Very, very nice. You can even export them. So this script, I'm pretty happy with it looking at it, but note that it is saying this script has not been deployed to your database yet. So we do want to go ahead and do this and see when I deploy this, it is against the dev database going to say, can we create these steps? Can we do these steps with the existing schema? And that is good to know. So let's go ahead and click deploy project there. And it is deploying my migration script to the development environment and making sure that that works, doing some sanity checking for me. I can see one migration was deployed successfully, and I can see the name of that as well. So I am a refresher. I do like to click refresh frequently. And when I refresh, when I look at this, what I want to see is, I want to see not only, hey, did we have our migration script in there? Yes, I was just working in that migration script. That's there. But also I want to see, hey, did you update the schema model when you made this change as well? And if I now open customers in the schema model there and I scroll down through it, I can see that the create statement for the current state of my database features an index with my new name. And if I scroll on over, yes, it in fact does include the company name. Now I do want to do an additional test to see if this works in my build. I'm going to go ahead and close the solution, or actually let's go ahead and commit first. So let's go ahead and here we'll put a commit message in. So we refactored an index on customers. We probably should be more specific, but we don't want to type a lot in this demo. It's prompting me about saving files. And in this one, I want to go ahead and cancel and just look at what I have open. I can close my migration script at this point. I still have this window open from SSDT open, and this is what's triggering that, do you want to save this message? I already have that logic moved into my migration script, so I don't need that anymore. I can close out all those windows, and now when I go ahead and click commit, I don't get that weird save as thing, because it was actually that SSDT window that it was worrying about. I'm going to go ahead, I want to build this now. And sometimes if I am building something directly against my local solution, which is kind of a weird thing to do, but I like to do it. Sometimes if I'm doing that and I have the solution open, it complains about locked files. So I close the solution. I don't have to close all of Visual Studio, just the solution. And now I am saying, okay, this is build number 2. And I'm going to go ahead and click debug. And I'm using this just to be able to very easily see the script I have at the top while it executes in VS Code. And it's validating my project. It's now checking, hey, okay, does everything you have, any pre and post deployment scripts you've had, any baseline script if it's present, any migration scripts on that, does it work to build from scratch? And then since I told this to also deploy to Northwind QA, now at this point, like last time I ran this, it created Northwind QA and applied things to it, but it already exists this time. So it doesn't have to drop that QA database. It's smart enough to look at Northwind QA and be like, oh, I just need to execute the migration script to you. And here is the print statements that I have in there. Now, I did leave a print statement in that said dropping. It didn't actually drop it, and we can prove that. Let's go ahead and prove that, because my print statement actually wasn't correct. I am having my artifacts exported here, and one of the artifacts I'm creating is a release artifact. For the 002 release, I can go into the report and go into changes.html. And for my release artifact, there was one change in there. And the change was to move from, this is the logical definitions, this index to this index. Well, how do we know that it didn't just drop it? We can look at the script. Looking at the script tab, I can see the entire script. And you can review this before you ever deploy, by the way. But I can look in this and see, okay, here's where the pre-deployment scripts, if any of them are. I haven't set those up. Here is the incremental migration that was run. And here is the migration script that was run. So scrolling through here, we can see, yeah, I did actually have a print statement I left in there that had a drop in there, but the actual SQL that was run was the create with online equals on and drop existing equals on. And then I did a rename in there. So I can actually validate exactly what was run in this script if I want to. And my option is I can do that before I ever deploy as well. This has been some tips on using SQL prompts to make editing in Visual Studio easier. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in another video shortly.